this next sequence of we're going to do an interview and a panel, and this one we're going to get down to the ground level here and start talking about tech and startups and how, which I think is an issue that did come up or has come up on multiple occasions over the last day or so, is that, you know, how do you bring combining profit with purpose down to that sort of level, you know, when you're just getting it going. And I think we've assembled a great group of folks to talk about that. And we're going to start with my friend Rick Turoczy, who's a Portlander. And hey! Has anybody read Silicon Florist here? If you're not, you should be. It's a great startup repository of a lot of great content. Thank you for that. And he's also involved in something really cool here in Portland called pie. He bakes pies. He's also a baker. Now, it's called the Portland Incubator Experiment, and it's a startup incubator, literally, that's in partnership with Google, Coca-Cola, Target, Nike, and Wieden+Kennedy, and they're based right here in the Pearl. And they just went through a selection process. How many is it? 10? 10 startups that they literally, like a communal thing. They're just located in the office there in the Pearl, and they give them a little bit of money and some mentoring from all these corporate accounts and see what happens, which is really, really cool. And the interviewer is Emily Harris, who just came off being the host of Oregon Public Radio's Think Out Loud, so you might have heard her voice on the airways. And she's, I've had some great conversations about how she's traveled the world in Russia and Eastern Europe, and we were trading stories about Poland and Warsaw, where I spent a little bit of time working on my Polish. And now she's developing a whole bunch of new things and a book, too, so about her experiences. So let's call up Emily and Rick, and let's get going.
I think they're both on. Yeah, but don't burn your fingers.
There you go.
Oh, there you are. Good.
Switch.
I think I've changed. Oh, switch.
Switch chairs.
Oh, cheers. Switch chairs.
You want me over here? Okay. Cool.
So my 6-year-old and I are practicing to be
Switch.
clowns, and this is one of the routines
that's a good
we
routine.
do, is we
We
switch
just did that,
chairs,
yeah.
but we turn our backs to the audience and stuff. We won't do that. I think from over the course of the last day and plus change, my book has switched to a mobile app. Like, I'm going to throw my kids out the window. I've got an app for that. So it's maybe new school, not old school. Rick Turoczy does a million things, as Terry just mentioned. Has anybody here ever been into the offices of Wieden+Kennedy? Okay, so some of you have. So you know that feeling, you go into the Pearl and then you walk in. Okay, I walked in there and I was going to meet somebody who runs a program called Writers in the Schools, and Wieden+Kennedy had donated space. So I wasn't expecting, I was going into Wieden+Kennedy, and I opened the door, I was like, wow, this is someplace really cool. Look at this awesome staircase that starts big and goes small, and what are all these crazy pictures on the wall? And I got upstairs, and it's just this awesome lobby where you feel like something's happening. You walk through past the ping pong table, you know, and through the cafe, and to get to the place I was going to. Well, you don't go through those offices to go see pie. You go around the corner, and you go up a little flight of cement steps, and the glass is all frosted, so you can't really see into what's going on, except for around the corner where you can see a bunch of sticky notes on the wall and a whole pile of bikes. But that's where Rick is spending a lot of his time, in the pie incubator area. And you go inside, and it's just a bunch of big white tables with a lot of people tapping away, and there's a little hum. And then Rick's over in the corner, and when I was there was a dog, a golden doodle.
There were a few
maybe?
dogs.
A few dogs in and
around.
out.
Yeah.
So tell us, what is actually happening behind all that tapping and buzzing?
Yeah, Emily's like, is it just people typing on computers? Is that what you guys do? So basically what's happening in Pi is we are trying to help really early stage startups get off the ground. We're giving them a 3-month program of mentoring that's basically the whole startup cycle. So everything from how do you incorporate your business? What do you do for accounting? How do you do marketing and communications? How do you do biz dev? How do you hire? How do you fire? All of that jazz. We're taking them through that program with a bunch of mentors from the Portland area and from the tech and startup scene around the nation, and then also mentors from Coca-Cola, Google, and Target.
You mentioned mentors earlier when we spoke, and it seemed like that you talked about the mentors at these big brands being really, really excited to get involved. And that seems to me one indication of the desire for purpose in business. Is that why, what is motivating people at these big brands to get involved with young startups? I mean, is it they want to help, or is it we're going to find the next big idea and make a bunch of money off it?
Well, I think that's the lottery ticket dream for everybody who's participating, that maybe somehow the next Facebook or Google or something comes out of this, but that's not our objective. That's kind of a nice to have. I think what has been most interesting in working with the big brands is they are very used to people coming to them with their hand out asking for sponsorship or cash or a check to do something or other. But this is one of the very first times that I think people have come to them saying, we want you to participate in this program. We want your experience and your mentorship for these startups. And we were literally shocked at the level of mentors that we got from those organizations. We were expecting, maybe get some people at a managerial level with some previous startup experience who would be able to help the startups and dedicate some time to it. But just to give you an example of the level of people who are participating in the program with us, from Coca-Cola, we have the woman who is in charge of all marketing communications globally for Coca-Cola. We have the guy who's in charge of all mobile strategy for Coca-Cola. We have the guy who manages all of social strategy for Coca-Cola. For Target, we have the guy who was in charge of moving Target.com off of Amazon.com and onto their own framework. We have the woman who's in charge of this new grocery initiative. So if you go into Target these days, you'll find fresh food and more groceries and that kind of thing. She's in charge of that program. She's one of our mentors. On the Google level, it's people from Google Ventures and YouTube and the Android team and the Chrome team, and just this really amazing level of people who they get in the space, they get with those startups, and they get really, really excited about what they're doing. So what do they get out of it? I think there's a lot that people are getting out of it personally, just by giving back. But from a corporate level, I think what's really interesting to them is they work in very large, slow-moving organizations. And startups move fast, fast, fast. And it's a really an interesting kind of dichotomy there, where these people are working together and finding some happy middle ground. The big corporations are learning how to be iterative and make mistakes and fail faster and move farther, while the startups are learning, okay, this is how corporations have established this reach. Coca-Cola is in more than 200 countries worldwide, so they're dealing with this massive scale that is unfathomable to the startups. Coca-Cola and Target are talking about campaigns for 2016 and 2020 because they're confident their company is going to be around at that point in time, where startups are like, I'm looking at next Tuesday and wondering what that's going to be like. So it's just, there's a really interesting back and forth, and the collaboration between the two groups has been, even in, we're only a couple weeks in, but even at this point, it's been really, really interesting watching that dynamic.
So you were able to approach these big brands because of who you're working with, who is part of Wieden and Kennedy. A number of these are their clients, have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. How would people in this room, with their own ideas and startups, tap into that desire to, be part of something that's moving fast, that's creative, that's fresh, and tap into some of that expertise, develop mentorship relationships if they can't get into the Wyden and Kennedy Pi project?
I mean, it's honestly, it's a really good time to be. It's always a really good time to be doing a startup, quite frankly. But right now, in terms of the support mechanisms in place, I think it's a better time than we've seen in quite a while.
Why?
There are lots of incubators popping up for people. So in Portland, people are probably familiar with the Oregon Entrepreneur Network, which has been the primary organization driving entrepreneurship in the state, and to some extent, the Software Association of Oregon has been participating in that as well. What we're starting to see now are these new groups of mentors and funding, things like the Portland Seed Fund, which takes some of the city money from Portland, some of the city money from Hillsborough, and some money from private investors, and invests in very, very early stage startups. That provides them capital to hire or live on or whatever for a 3 to 6 month period while they're working on their project. Pi is very similar to that. We provide a stipend, we run a 3-month program, and then we kind of manage this as an alumni network that continues to grow and continues. Once you go through Pi, you're kind of automatically signed up as a mentor, keeps things going. And our other objective is to really not be exclusive about it. So we're trying to find ways where we can, even if you're not in the Pi program, you can gain some benefit of something we're doing. If one of these big names comes to town to mentor some of the startups, there's no reason we shouldn't have them giving a talk and meeting with all the startups.
Are you doing that?
Yeah, we're working on setting those kind of things up.
So that's a new territory for you, but you're hoping to have that happen.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like, we're actually being exposed to people that people at Wyden and Kennedy don't regularly get to talk. We get to talk to them more often than Wyden and Kennedy does, so it even becomes interesting we always refer to it as upstairs, because we're on the first floor, and Wyden and Kennedy is the other 5 floors above us, or 6 floors above us. And so we're like, we need to get these guys upstairs. So the interesting thing is everybody's getting something out of it, and everybody's giving something back, and we want to extend that reach to people who aren't immediately impacted by the program but could stand to benefit from it.
Your website touts the number of companies. It's a few that have been funded or acquired through the Pi program. Is that what you define as success?
No. I think
partially.
I mean, that's always nice. If somebody wants to cash a check, and that's a good thing. What we have looked at most incubators, or most incubator models, so Techstars you may have heard of, or Y Combinator, which focuses on the tech scene, their measure of success is very much funding. Every company in those programs is actively seeking investment from angels or venture capitalists. We stepped back a bit with our program and said, we want the startup to tell us what success is for them. Are you going after funding? If you are, we'll make sure you get there in 3 months. Do you just want to get to a place where you can bootstrap and continue to run your business, without taking any outside investment? Okay, we'll work on getting you there. The other thing is, quite frankly, Y Combinator and Techstars and the Portland Seed Fund are almost this next echelon above what we're doing. And so we're even of the mind that if what you really want to do is get into 500 startups, we'll help you get to the point that you have a better chance of getting in there. So we're not really looking at funding as the end all, be all and end all of it. We're trying to find what does this company think they're capable of doing, and then push them farther and faster to get there.
I know you're restricting what you will tell about the people who are part of Pi right now, but could you give us some examples of the type of work that people are doing or have done in past classes?
Yeah, most of our and this is the first official class of Pi.
It's been around a couple of years.
We served as a co-working space for about 2 years, and so we had some really interesting startups come through there at that point in time, and that's where we kind of discovered this dynamic of peer mentoring and providing more mentorship and helping people with connections. And we said, this isn't what Pi was originally designed to do, but there's something interesting happening here, so why don't we take a chance and formalize it and see what happens if we run it as a program, a formalized program. But some of the companies that came through initially that you might have heard of, there's a company in town called Urban Airship that basically if you have a smartphone device and applications send you little messages, it's highly likely that Urban Airship is handling that activity for you. They do work from everybody from ESPN to other Disney properties to Groupon and things like that. So they're the guys behind, they're the technology behind making those messages show up on your phone. There's another company that actually, this is a really nice story. There's a guy named Alex Payne who worked at Twitter. He's the guy who unfortunately, it was the guy working on the Twitter API, so how people connect to Twitter during the summer of the fail whale. That was his job, was building out the API and trying to make it scalable. He really liked Portland. He decided to move here. As soon as he moved here, he left Twitter to go co-found and become CTO of a company called Bank Simple, which is trying to reinvent basically the consumer experience with banking. Yeah, exactly. That's what everybody says. It's like, I think their tagline is, we want to make a bank that doesn't suck. I think that's, so, and originally it was the dev shop, right? It was the engineering team that kind of grew out of Pi there. And they had offices in New York, San Francisco, and then this dev shop in Portland. And, they were there a few months. They grew to be big enough to move out of Pi. And now actually the entire company of Bank Simple has decided to headquarter in Portland. So that's a really interesting win for us, to be able to give them that footprint and that kind of exposure to the city and what was available here. And everybody, as we're all familiar, everybody kind of fell in love with Portland and decided this was the place to be. So.
I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, because you told me before that you were a little surprised at the number of people, the percentage of people in Pi winding up in Pi were actually from Portland, not from other parts of the country. But I want to get first to this profit and purpose focus. As you talk to and as you work with the people who are involved in Pi or who come through the incubator before, how do these two things balance out in their mind?
We're really starting to see, so Urban Airship started at Pi roughly 2 years ago, and they're starting to get to that point where they're feeling there are things they could be doing for the greater good. Like they finally got through all of that run, and now looking at the broader picture.
So it came second rather than first.
Yeah, and but we're also starting to see some companies who are thinking of that sooner rather than later. And from Pi's perspective, what we find really interesting is there the ability to incubate those types of companies as well? I mean, everybody has the same exact business problems. So one of the things we've proposed is maybe we have a nonprofit in there as one of the startups. I mean, maybe they go through the curriculum and we figure out, can we get nonprofits stood up sooner rather than later? I see Justin in the audience. Some of another one of the tracks we've been talking about is, do we get people on track to become a B Corp? Let's figure out how we do some greater good for the world by helping companies establish early on that they're going to be focused on these things that are important.
What do you think are the particular challenges to that? Because you said we're going to see if maybe we could do this. Maybe we could incubate companies that are starting with purpose and hoping profit will follow. What would be the challenges to mentoring those?
There's absolutely no challenge in mentoring those. I think the only difficulty is actually establishing the program and having them go. I think it's an interesting program to offer up, and I don't know that everybody would really they'd be like, why are you doing this for a nonprofit? It's kind of like sometimes you do fundraising for nonprofits and they're like, why are you trying to give us money? And well, because you're a nonprofit, we're trying to help you out. It's the same kind. That's the only thing I'm worried about is we establish a program and nobody shows up because they're like, well, what does that mean? So
I'm not sure if you were here for the morning. Probably, I know you're busy coming. So we heard a presentation about by a nonprofit, a for-profit, business that uses their purpose to drive their business. It's sort of let's see, 20%, I should get one of you guys back up here, 20% pro bono, very purpose-driven, and drives the rest of their business, which is also very, very purpose-driven, but for profit, not a non-profit. In the for-profits, the startups that you're working with, how many of them are driven by some kind of I'm going to change the world, and here's my business model?
They all have a vision for definitely changing the world. I mean, that's part of the selection process for Pi wasn't really so much about the idea they were building. It was more about the personality of the teams, how they work together, how coachable they are. It's really kind of people figure out. And you know, because honestly, most of the companies that come into the incubator will leave with a different idea than they came in with. They'll either say, this isn't working, we got to retrench and do something new, or let's change this a little bit. So they all have these grand visions of how they're going to change the world. Some are very, you know, maybe not purpose-driven, but you know, the idea of the greater good in terms of sharing a collective knowledge, or in terms of storytelling for particular area, or
Making
a particular
banking
object.
better.
Making life easier on people in a way that is both profitable for the company and better for the world.
Adding more push ads to your phone.
Exactly, annoying you more times on your phone with push notifications.
Do you think they had a purpose? Urban Airship had a like greater good kind of purpose?
I will argue that there is a greater good kind of purpose, but it might not be like as obvious. The reason Urban Airship exists is because the thing that these engineers are trying to do with these products is incredibly difficult. And the way to make those activities happen is more difficult than it should be. Urban Airship really started because they wanted to make something that made this functionality easier for engineers. Engineers were banging their heads against the wall going, I can't get this push notification to work. And so they're like, how can we create a drop-dead simple way for any engineer who has an application, who wants to add this functionality, how can we give that to them simply and easily? And I mean, if you extrapolate way out, then maybe that means that someday there's a nonprofit with an iPhone app that can suddenly have push notifications that they couldn't otherwise have because they couldn't find the engineering talent to do it. So, I mean, it's a few steps away, but when it comes right down to it, they were just trying to make things easier for people who are building things for the world.
Okay, we're gonna have questions in just one sec. I wanted to touch in on Portland. Portland's been often, you know, talked about as, we've got this, you know, very vibrant, creative entrepreneur community, and all the money goes elsewhere. So what's your lay of the land right now as far as the reality of Portland being a place to do a profitable startup?
The reality is that's starting to change. I think some people are gaining, for a long time, Portland startups were seen as kind of a flyover city. It was like, if you want to do a tech startup, move to Seattle, move to the Bay, move to New York, you're not going to be able to make it here. And we're starting to see that tide kind of change. People are finding funding. They're running, you know, they have concepts for big corporations that could be run out of here. The business environment is changing in a very positive way. And I think Portland also has this, you know, humility to it that has sometimes held some companies back. I mean, there's like
we don't want to rule the world.
We don't want, and I refer to that as, and I see that as both there are positives and negatives to that, but I refer to that as kind of our food cart mentality. Like, I don't want to build a restaurant. I don't want to build a chain of restaurants. I want a really awesome food cart that does this food exceptionally well, and I want to make a decent living doing that. And that's very much Portland's. You know, Portland has a mentality like that in the tech scene. I think that's why mobile has been so popular here. I'm one developer. I can build a single application and sell it without needing a huge team, without needing to build a huge company. It's my food cart on your iPhone kind of mentality.
So given the applause to that, like, supportive of that mentality and that approach, do you... Or food carts. Oh, okay, maybe it's just food carts.
Just food carts in general
mind,
usually
I'm not
draw
extrapolate.
applause from
I was
this
just
crowd.
going to think, well, maybe people like that, and so still people don't want to be a big "I'm going to rule the world" kind of place.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is
room?
there's room for both.
Gotcha.
Now, where we're starting to see, you know, Portland's starting to see itself more as a metropolitan city on the map and on the same level as other metropolitan cities, and because of that, some things become more available and options for us to pursue.
Questions? Carmen. Oh.
I think. Oh, there we go. Okay, any questions?
Carmen,
Oh,
right beside you.
Yeah, I'm scared of your mic though. Just to follow up on that a little bit, some of the companies that have gotten a good start here and become very successful. I'm thinking of Jive Software, where they were very successful, but then they moved their headquarters to San Francisco, or to Palo Alto rather, after they had established themselves. And what do you feel like going forward, more of those companies that start here and are successful will stay rather than go elsewhere?
Yeah, I think Jive was at a very unique point in our kind of maturation of this whole startup scene. I think they're not even sure that they would have chosen Portland today. They probably would have chosen the Bay back in that. If things were similar as they were today, I think they've been pretty open of like the Bay would have been a much better area for them. But I think we're starting to see companies like Jive's level that are definitely going to stay here, or Bank Simple is a great example. They're definitely relocating to be here. I'm such a cheerleader for the Portland tech scene. Like everybody assumes that I would be upset about the Jive headquarters moving to Palo Alto. I actually think it's a good move for them. And I'll tell you why. There are more than 100 Jive engineers sitting in a building about 3 blocks away from Pi. If Jive has some major liquidity event that puts some disposable cash in those engineers' pockets, then suddenly we have 100 new startups, or we have 100 new angels that understand the tech scene and are able to fund the tech scene. And if their valuation is increased by being in Palo Alto, that's a much better story all around. I think it pays back in to the ecosystem, and I don't think to this point Portland's really had one of those successful exits where people are able to put money back into helping the next phase of startup. So I think we're seeing it start to change, but I'm also not wrapped around the axle on the Jive move. I think Urban Airship will stay. I would find it hard to fathom that they would move at this point in time. Yeah, exactly. Part of the Tulsa guys.
Hey, Rick.
Hi.
With all the different startups you've been working with all different things you're doing, what are the most common stumbling blocks, and how do you help them overcome that consistently happen?
The most common stumbling block for any startup I've encountered, and I don't care if it's a tech startup, I don't care if it's a food cart or somebody trying to do even creative work, creative agency. The most common stumbling block is entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because they have this grand vision of how they're going to change the world. They know full well that they are capable of making this thing happen. What they have a very, very difficult time overcoming is the number of incremental steps required to actually get to that vision. They have a hard time carving out what is the most simple thing I can do immediately to get this thing going. And that's where they get stuck. They have this broader vision. They're trying to attain perfection instead of just saying, this is the most minimal work I can do to get something in the market. And the one, I don't know who said it originally, but the quote I always use with them is, if you're not embarrassed by your first release, you waited too long. So, I mean, you got to get it out the door. Okay, yeah. So, you got to get it out the door. You got to push it. And you will be embarrassed by it. But fact of the matter is, you're likely the only one who will be embarrassed by it. Everybody else will won't be on their radar.
So, having been to demo and, experience with TechCrunch, Disrupt, and so on, one of the frustrating things I'm seeing out there is that I feel very few startups are actually creating real products. They're creating either, products that are not necessary to
coupon products,
ecosystem,
perhaps?
Coupon products, absolutely. Yeah, do we need another Groupon clone out there? And it doesn't seem like the incubators are doing a good job of encouraging them not to do that. It seems like they're rewarding that, especially if you see some of the winners coming out of those places. What can the scene do to kind of change that?
I think it's not necessarily herd mentality, but I think people see successful companies and want to emulate that success, and obviously sometimes they chase it a little too closely. That's part of the reason we wanted to focus on funding not being the measure of success for some of our companies. I mean, some of our folks are taking are honestly taking risks that might not ever become a big company, but could be something very meaningful. And other folks are chasing dreams that could very well make them a big company. But what we were hoping to do was, I think looking at Pi, you say, okay, it's got these major brands, it's got Wieden & Kennedy. I'll wait 3 months and see 10 new advertising solutions that come out of Pi. And that's the obvious and easy thing for us to do. And so what we're trying to do is take a little risk, make some intuitive leaps that to be quite honest, might confuse some of our brand mentors about why we've chosen them. But what we're trying to do very much that. Let's find some real products. Let's find some things that are new or interesting ways about thinking of the market. Let's fill some gaps that major players haven't figured out yet to how to do. And we think there's some value there. We had, just this week, our mentors from FreshBooks, which is a company in Toronto, Canada, that it was a very small startup even just a few years ago. I wanted them in early for that very reason. If you don't know FreshBooks, they do online invoicing. That's it. That's all they do. And they entered the market taking on a company called Intuit that had QuickBooks and Quicken. And everybody's like, you're crazy. Why are you taking on Intuit? And they're like, because we can do this one thing better than Intuit will ever be able to do it. And now they have 3.5 million customers. So, I mean, we're looking for those kind of opportunities. Is there a niche? Is there some new way of approaching this? Or is there, and this is one point I wanted to touch on that I totally spaced, but I think when people look at incubators, they regularly look for invention. Hey, did somebody come up with a new technology, or did somebody build some new wacky app? And we're really looking for innovation, which I classify as taking readily available or accepted technology and applying it in an interesting or innovative way. So, as an example, Foursquare. Foursquare didn't invent anything. They just took technology and applied it in a really innovative way. You all had a GPS unit in your pocket. Let's use that to our advantage, and let's add a game layer on top of it. There was no technological leap that occurred there, but it was really an innovative way of applying that technology and engaging people. So those are the kind of things we're looking for. You're not going to see any big, amazing inventions coming out of there.
One more.
One more. Is that how? There you
Yeah.
Whoa.
go. Whoa.
Feelings are my life. I feel it. Anyway, you had mentioned earlier that you will take a company, you take them through the 3-month groovy jazzy, how to build a business, great. Then you take them up, if they decide if they want to go after funding, you'll take them and help them get there. And I know, I work with entrepreneurs a lot, and it all does come back to the money, honey, eventually. So, and it's incredibly difficult to get funding. And that's one of the hardest things I have to work with entrepreneurs is how do you position yourself with investors and VCs or angels or banks or whomever. So do you have some secret that I don't know? Is there some good, wonderful way to get them, how do you get them to that?
How do we get them to the money? Yeah. So I think there are two specific ways that we're trying to help them get there further, faster. One of them is, any incubator or accelerator you've seen, they have this kind of traditional demo day, right? We're going to take our folks and we're going to have them present to you. And, we bring together a room of angels and venture capitalists and have them present their ideas in front of them. That enables those folks to have contact with people that they would otherwise have to work very hard to get in front of. So using our existing network to draw those folks into the room so that those people can pitch them and maybe get some interesting ideas there. The other thing is being a person who helps entrepreneurs chase funding. I'm sure you're always like, a customer is better than a VC. Like, revenue coming in the door is way better than asking if you can borrow somebody else's money. So what we're also trying to do there is part of our program, and we think this is interesting for both the startups and the corporations. Part of our program includes a roadshow at the end of the class where we go to Minneapolis to present to Target corporate. We go to Atlanta to present to Coca-Cola corporate, and we go to Mountain View to present to Google corporate. So not only do they get the opportunity to see these large corporations and present to a larger group of people and expose what they're doing to a larger group of people, but that is also kind of that starting that early that may introduce a sales cycle. You know, somebody may say, hey, we could apply that technology in this way, or see something that one of the mentors with whom we work didn't see that would be important for the corporation. So that's the other thing we're trying to do. And again, that's simply because of this just interesting network of tech people and the brands and Wieden and Kennedy that causes all of that to kind of come together.
Okay, Rick Turoczy, thank you very,
Sure.
very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
SOBCon Florist and Pi.